Okay, very good. All right, this is Patrick Russell with the Making History Project. I am interviewing Charles Lester for the first time. This interview is taking place on May the 8th, 2024 in Loranger, Louisiana. And we are conducting this interview by the Making History Project. So how are you doing today, Charles?
I feel pretty good.
All right. And can you tell me your date of birth?
Yes, sir. It's 5/29/1922.
Very good. And where were you born?
I was born on the right bank of Little Chapapila Creek, which is about 4 miles north of Loranger. Loranger is in the center part of Tangipahoa Parish.
And you were just a little bit north of New Orleans.
About 60 miles.
Okay. And when you were growing up, what was your hometown like?
Well, my mother and father started living out on an old place near the creek where my grandfather had a grist mill. And the first thing I remember him telling me, my mother she was 10 years younger than my father. And they were raised within 7 miles of here, but didn't know each other until my mother went from Hammond to visit her sister running a logging camp in Texas. And when she got over there, that's where she met my father. And they got married, and they come out to grandfather's old place to start living. And that's where I started from.
And how big is your hometown?
No, not very big. It's small. You have 2 stores there. That might give you some idea.
And what is your hometown known for?
Originally timber was cut throughout this country, and whenever they finished cutting the timber people tried to establish a town there, and that was before automobiles. And when automobiles come, well, that took care of that.
Okay. And how big was your family growing up?
Well, my mother and father were from large local families, but they had 5 children. I am the oldest, twin brothers younger than me, and then a little sister during the Depression, and another one 17 years younger than I am.
All right. And did you go to high school?
Yes, sir, and I finished high school at the age of 16.
Wow. So you must have been a good student.
Well, whenever I get into telling you about the CCCs, you'll understand.
Okay. And so, did you have any hobbies or sports while you were in high school growing up?
I tried to play basketball, but I was short. There was 3 of us about the same size. We were used to train the other people.
Okay. And what about hobbies? Do you like fishing or hunting or anything like that?
Well, fishing was always, because we fished in the creek, played in the creek. And one thing that might be of interest, in front of the house, about 200 yards above the house, there's a bend in the creek that had a log on it. Each spring, an alligator would come and lay on that log. And Mother would say, Howard, the gator's going to get them kids playing about 200 yards below in the creek. He'd say, don't worry about it. If they get close to that gator, he'll jump out of the creek.
All right. And then, so tell me about the JCC.
The CCCs? Well,
CCCs, correct.
yeah, Civilian Conservation Corps. It was a program that they had during the Depression that would give young people something to do, and they could help their parents too.
And what did you end up doing? What was your project?
It's kind of funny. Whenever they got ready to graduate, 3 of the boys said that they wanted to go in the CCs and they wanted me to go with them. Well, I asked my parents about it, and they said, if you can get in, well and good, but we're not going to sign nothing. And so whenever we got ready to go, we went up to get in the CCs, and somebody said, you have to be 17 years old. Well, I was only 16. But anyway, the older boy with us said, you don't have a birth certificate, so just tell them you're a year older. Well, I did, and it worked.
All right. And where did you end up going?
Well, they wanted to go out west. I wanted to stay close to home. I'd never been away from home. But anyway, we all signed to go out west. And that evening, when they decided to split us up, I went west, they stayed home.
Okay, where'd you end up going out west?
I went to Company 5446, Berkeley, California, Wildcat Canyon.
And what did you end up doing there?
Well, you done park work and just cleaned up all at first, but they decided to send our camp north to dig gooseberries. But one of the boys come down with meningitis, and so they quarantined us for 6 weeks, and then we went up north. But where we went out from Sacramento on the west side of the valley.
And did
up
you
in the hills.
And did you graduate from high school before doing the CCC?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was your plans after that?
My plan was to go in the service, and at that time they had a program where they could save your money. Ordinarily, they would give you $30 a month. You could keep $8 and you sent the other home, or you could have the government hold it for you until you got out. And my desire was to let them hold my money and then later go on to school.
Okay. What did you want to do in school?
I just wanted to go, like the rest of them, go to college.
Okay. And did you have any particular plans of what you wanted to be after college?
Not after coming through depression. You just want to stay alive.
All right. Did you have any particular interest of where you would go for college?
Oh, yes. Southeastern in Hamlin, which is, I guess about 10 miles away.
All right. So how long were you in the CCC?
I stayed in, you had to sign up for 6 months toured. I signed up for 6, and after that I could sign up for 6 more and get sent back home to near where I was at. And I stayed a year out in California and then come back to Louisiana.
All right. So you did that for an entire year.
Yes, sir.
All right. And then what did you do after that?
Well, I was going to stay another year and let the government keep my money, but one Saturday they brought us to Amite, that's near a town nearby, and put us off for the weekend. Well, when we went back to catch the truck to go back to camp, we had a tornado during the night that blew part of the town away, and they didn't come get us. So the boy that was with me said, "I'm going home." I said, "I am too." So that was the end of my CCs.
All right. And what year was this?
I guess 1940, I believe.
All right.
Along there.
And did there come a point where you ended up going into the military?
Yes, sir. After that, I had to have something to do, so I run a dairy for a 17-cow dairy for a friend, and I received $20 a month and board.
All right. And this is before you decided to do the military?
Yes, sir.
All right. And what made you want to join the military?
Well, we had been in the CCs, and you had money coming in every month, so that was part of the reason. But I had the same friends that I tried to get in the CC with. Some of them, two of them wanted to go in the Navy and wanted to go with them. So we went to New Orleans to the customs house to join. And when they looked at one of the smaller boy, one was large and us two smaller ones. When they looked at one of the smaller ones, they said, "We don't want you, your teeth protrude." And then they let me take the complete exam, and they said, "Turn around." And they said, "We don't want you." That was the Navy, because you got a crooked back, one shoulder lower than the other. So then the boy that was turned down said, "Aaron, let's go down and join the Marines." So the other boy was still being processed. So we went down to the Marines recruiting office, and the old sergeant was so nice, and we were going through, not having any trouble. And then this boy that had finished taking the exam at the customs house found us, and he asked the sergeant, said, "Are them boys down here now?" And he kicked us out of there. So twice in one day I was turned down by the Navy and the Marines.
All right. Okay, so what happened after being turned down twice in one day?
I went back milking cows, and while I was milking cows, I went to the post office one day, and I saw a small recruiter's card that said, "Join the Coast Guard." Well, when I was in the CCs, one of the foremen said that if he was a young man, he'd go in the Coast Guard. The draft was on, and people were trying to decide what branch of service they were going in. But anyway, that rung a bell. And while I was around Frisco, they had big guns around the harbor, and the Army was handling that. But in my mind, that was the Coast Guard. Nobody told me. In my mind, I thought that was the Coast Guard. So that's what I thought I was talking about.
All right, so then you went down and you applied, and how was that process?
Well, I didn't have money enough to go to Shreveport to the recruiting office. So I was discussing it with my mother, and she talked to a lady that had been to Barksdale Field. And she said, "Miss Nancy, if he really wants to go, tell him to come see me. I'll give him half of a bus ticket." So I got the bus ticket, $2 or $3, and took off.
All right, and how was that interview when you made it to Shreveport?
Well, they accepted me, and I was there 3 days. And somebody said, let's go see this new Randolph Scott Coast Guard movie that's showing. So I went with them, and that's where I found out what I'd got in.
All right, and were you surprised?
Very much so, because I thought I was getting in the army where them big guns were.
And now what did you realize you were going to end up doing?
Well, they sent me to boot camp. We went through boot camp, and then they sent us up in Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia. Well, that afternoon, they took some of us and sent us out to a little creek lifeboat station. One guy stayed there, and later on, they took this other boy and myself and started down the beach. But what they were doing is putting us at lifeboat stations. But anyway, when we got to Virginia Beach, they let him get off. And then he says, well, you go with me, and we go on down. So we crossed the sand bridge, got on a little sliver of land between the Sound and the ocean, not very wide, and we started driving down this. And we drove and drove, and then it began to get dark. And he said, you see that little tower down there? I said, yes. He said, that's where you're going. Well, I began wondering how I was going to get out of that before I got there. I thought I had got myself in one awful mess.
And what were you driving exactly?
They had a pickup that was delivering supplies and things along the beach. The Coast Guard man was driving it. He was from that station, but I didn't know it at the time.
And so you enlisted in the Coast Guard, and this was in 1940?
41.
41. All right. And have you had other family members serve in the military before?
Not that I knew of. The thing that made it important to me, through the Depression, the people that seemed to get along best out where I was is the ones that got bonuses and all from the government from being gassed in the First World War. But that first drew my attention to getting in the service.
What about your relatives in Louisiana?
And at that, how did your family feel, like specifically your mom and dad, about you joining the Coast Guard right on the eve of World War II?
My dad, he missed the first draft in the First World War by 2 days, and he didn't think much of it. They thought I was kind of cuckoo, I think.
All right. And at the time, what are you thinking is going to happen in the world? Do you think that for sure you're going to war at that point?
The only thing I was worrying about at that time was getting away from that place down there. But I went on down, and it was wonderful because they had hired a cook, and the station was just clean, decent, and everything was wonderful except where it was. It was out of the world. But anyway, things went pretty well, and then one of the fellows that was delivering supplies up and down the beach to the station, and he asked me to come go with him. So I went with him, and I could see peanut stacks and all, something you don't have in Louisiana, and I began to think more of it all the time. But in the process, he asked me, he said, can you climb? I said, yes, sir. He said, I had a radio antenna knocked off by lightning. Do you think you could climb up there and put it back on? So when we got back, I took a wire and tied it on my hip, and I shimmied up the pole, and I put that thing on, And I didn't know it, but there was a 16-year-old girl watching this 19-year-old kid go up the pole, and I didn't know it at the time.
And who was this 16-year-old girl?
Well, I'll tell you. About 3 days later, we were at the station eating, and they had a Polish boy that had been in there about a month. He was an old timer. I'd only been there 3 days. But anyway, all at once after lunch, he says, "Come go with me, come go with me. There's 2 girls going over the beach, 2 girls going over the beach." I said, "Get out of here. I want to get away from this place." He kept on. So finally I went with him. But he run up to where the brunette, young brunette was, and he started talking with her. So I go dragging along with her friend in the back, and we started down the beach. And this one that was with him would pick at me. I was 19 years old, she was 16. And I thought that was kind of silly. But anyway, we turned and we started back up the beach. And when we got to the edge of the beach, there was a bunch of cucklebirds. I don't know whether you know what a cucklebird is. It's a weed that grows up. It has little burrs with thorns all over it. But anyway, I reached down and got a handful of them burrs, and I rubbed it in that pretty brown hair. I said, "That'll take care of that." But it didn't.
So you had a fan.
It turned out later on to be more than a fan. It was my wife for 45 years.
Wow. So that's how you met your wife way back then.
That's it.
Okay. And what beach was this again?
This was at Little Island Lifeboat Station down the beach from Virginia Beach.
All right. And that's where you did your basic training?
Well, that's where I was sent after training. And I had been there, and then this fellow that I went up and down the beach with supplies ended up being my father-in-law. But he, in the part-time, whenever he wasn't with the Coast Guard, he was fishing with a seine on the beach. And he asked me if I wanted to go with him. Well, I was tickled to death. I'd never seen fishing with a seine. So I went with him, and he began to teach me how to pull the skiff through the surf and how to put out a seine and to fish. And first thing you know, when he would sell his fish, he'd give me a part. And shucks, I was getting $21 a month, and the government taking $3 out for insurance, so I wasn't very loaded. But anyway, first thing you know, this job at the station there was getting better and better.
And so let's go back a little bit. So you're on the cusp of World War II, and tell me what you saw, what you were thinking about the world at that time.
Well, I'll give you an example. We had an old surfman that was there, and at that time, Germany was headed into Russia. This before we got into war. And the old man used to say, it's like a Kyle, the way they said the Kyle line, said, Germany is running, but she's going to fetch up when she gets to the end. And that's about the way I thought of it. But I didn't think a whole lot because I was young.
And what about Japan? Were there any thoughts about Japan at that time?
No thought at all.
So
Not at that time, but it got where it was.
So the main focus was on Germany at that point.
Well, Europe, what was going on over there?
Okay. And tell me briefly how basic training was for you and what you ended up doing.
Well, whenever I was in basic training, all I done was drill, march, and because I was only that they were pushing them through pretty fast because they could tell war was maybe coming on. But anyway, they would in the meantime they would give us lectures on how to strip a gun down and all and stuff like that.
And where was basic training?
In Algiers, Louisiana.
And how long was it for?
6 weeks. But usually it was longer than that, but they would be in rush because of what was going on overseas.
Now, being that you're in the Coast Guard, did that include some swimming?
Yes, sir, and I got a real surprise right off. One day I was at Virginia Beach, and they said, "Come go with us. We're going to have a lifeboat drill." And I'd never been in a drill, but they wanted one more to fill in. So they told me we got the lifeboat, self-bailing lifeboat, rowed her out in the ocean, and then the man said, "All right, put your oars in." So we put our oars in, and he said, "Now we're going to turn the boat over." So we all stood on the rail of the boat and capsized it. He said, "Push away now when it comes down. Don't let it hit you in the head." So we went down. I'd never been through nothing like that. I thought they was going to take me out of the world. But anyway, that was my first big surprise. And then we learned how to go through the surf, handle situations. One time, a fishing boat had a man stung with a stingaree, and my father-in-law took a skiff with me, and we went through the surf, and we went out, and we got in instead of having to take the big boat out.
Was your father-in-law in the Coast Guard?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That was the fellow that first drove me down the beach, and that was his daughter watching me when I climbed up the pole.
All right. So what were your dates of service in the Coast Guard?
Well, this is a funny one. I got into service in June, and I think August we ended up in Virginia, and the Navy had I told you before it turned me down twice. Turned me down, and they on the 5th of December. We had a message at the station wanting more surfmen to go operate landing boats on the ships. And the Coast Guard told them they didn't have any more. They shipped them all the qualified ones. And they said, "Well, do you have anybody else that might be qualified?" I had never turned a key on the motor of a boat. But anyway, they decided to send me as one of the qualifiers. So here I go, 5th of December. They rated me. They jumped me from second class seaman to coxswain. That's third class now. And I didn't know how to put the crow on, didn't know nothing. But anyway, some of the surfmen helped us to get it one and tack it on. And then on December the 5th, 1941, they sent me to the Navy base in Norfolk to go on a ship.
Okay, so now you're in Norfolk. Tell me about that.
Well, we had to go through the Marine Guards, and here's this sloppy Coast Guard kid that didn't know what was going on. We went through the Marine Guard. They didn't say anything, but when I got in the barracks and those other Coast Guard people that had 3 or 4 years and wasn't rated yet, eat me up. But anyway, we were stayed in the barracks there. That was the 5th, and Sunday, Saturday night, they had all kinds of people in there that'd been shipped there. But they went out on the town, And you can imagine what it's like when a bunch of sailors been out on town come back Sunday morning. Well, there was all this going on, and then all at once we heard, Pearl Harbor has been bombed by the Japanese. You could have heard a pin drop. But then we stayed around there until I think it was the 10th. And they sent us down on the ship to go on the ship. Well, it was spitting snow. It was fine rain and snow. And when we got down to where the ship was, there was people out on stages with a rag in one hand and a paintbrush in the other. They were putting on camouflage, getting ready to send the ship into the North Atlantic.
All right. And were you eventually assigned to a ship?
That was the one I was going on, and I was assigned there for 3.5 years.
What was the name of that vessel?
USS Alhena.
And what type of a ship was it?
It was a cargo ship. It carried troops and cargo. And this can be seen by looking in these late date phones, dialing that USS Alhena, and you'll see 5 pictures of the Alhena in there with a big hole in it.
And how did that hole get in the ship?
Torpedo.
All right.
No, but before we went there, we went in the North Atlantic. That was worse than all the South Pacific stuff. But anyway, we were carrying supplies and equipment up and down the coast and over to Argentina and around and about. And one time when we was on the ship, and it was rough, and the spray would hit the deck and it would freeze as fast as it hit, and it was building up. And the captain told the boatswain mate, get them boys out there with pick handles and baseball bats, beat that ice up and shovel it off. Well, we didn't have anything, only foul weather gear we had is what we had in our sea bag. But anyway, I was one of the boys that wanted to do that. Man, I got out there and I was freezing to death. I had only seen snow a couple of times and never been in ice like that. And that boatswain mate would put us to visit, and when he'd turn his back, I would go to the engine room. He'd come run me out, and then round and around and around. I was freezing to death. And I saw him 30 years later, and he said, you were the most aggravating boy at the work. I said, for God's sakes, I was freezing to death. But it was rough. And then they would make us go in the crow's nest, spend 2 hours up there. And there was one face piece up there. This is wintertime cold. And there's one face piece, and you can imagine after somebody had it a while what it's like. And you wasn't about to touch that thing. But anyway, you had 2 hours to stay up there. And then you could come down. And that wind was cold, North Atlantic. Oh, it was awful. That worst duty I ever had.
Where is the ship going in the North Atlantic?
Well, it would go to Argentina and put off supplies, come back, different places along there. And later they decided, they loaded us with troops and supplies, and we went in a convoy across the Atlantic to Belfast, Ireland.
All right, and do you remember when that was, when you did the Atlantic crossing?
Well, it was the winter after I went on the ship. It was in 1940, no, 42, first part of 1942, I guess.
And it was in the winter time?
It sure was, and it was awful cold. Once we usually went part-time with a convoy. If you went, you had your ships all lined up. We had as many as from 9 to about 26 at different times. But when we would go, we would zigzag. You'd go you were in line, had your position, you had to hold it, and then you'd go so far on this course, and you would turn, go that, so the sub couldn't detect ahead of time where you were going. And in the afternoons, the escorts would be all around us, and you could hear the depth charges and see the water fly up, where they drop them over, keep the submarines off of us.
How many troops are on your troop ship at that point? Do you know?
Probably we had about 75 troops, but mostly we carried material for them to use.
Such as what? What were you transporting?
Oh, trucks, tanks, cargo, one-time mosquito nets, all kinds of stuff.
All right. And did you ever see a submarine? Were you ever under a submarine attack while you were doing that convoy across?
No, we never did see one. We just in the evening, for some reason, the escort would start dropping them charges. But anyway, we went from there on over to Belfast, Ireland, and there we discharged the troops and some of the cargo. And then when we finished, we went across to Glasgow, Scotland. We had billets of pig iron in the bottom. We take it over there probably for shipyard. But anyway, over at Glasgow, I had a real experience.
Yeah. What happened in Glasgow?
One evening we were there, and there was nothing going on. And this boy by the name of Schroeder says, "Lester, let's go into town." Well, everything was blacked out because of the war. And so they had this place that looked like it was a transportation hub of some kind, where buses and all. But anyway, we went over and we was walking around this building. And as we were walking around, we had to wear a gas mask. Well, what we would do with the gas mask, we'd take the mask out, fill it full of candy, and then people hadn't had candy in a long time over there. But anyway, we had our gas masks on, walking around this building. Two girls come by and hit them gas masks. They walked on up a little bit and they dropped back. Here they come again. But Schroeder says, "Come on." Well, we did. And it went pretty well until we went inside. When we went inside, I looked at his, and oh my God, I said, no. And I looked at what was with me, and she had yellow stringy hair and no teeth. He said, "Let's get out of here." So that was my experience in Glasgow, Scotland.
All right, more surprises.
I got one there.
All right. And back to the convoy. What was your job on the ship while you were crossing the Atlantic? What were you doing?
Maintenance and standing watches.
All right. So the watches weren't all that fun, were they?
Not at all.
And when you're in the crow's nest, you're up there by yourself?
That's right. You're looking for submarines.
And you never saw one, though?
Never did. Not then.
And while you were crossing, none of your ships got attacked?
Not while we were in the North Atlantic.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier about the face piece. Tell me more about that.
Well, now, one thing. Whenever we left Scotland, we were in the English Channel getting ready to come home. And our ship one night rode up on the stern of the Fuller. That was the ship ahead of us, and it caved the bow in a little bit, not too bad, but we managed to get it back to Brooklyn.
All right, had a little bit of an accident.
Yes, sir. It wasn't bad, wasn't too bad. Not like was going to happen later.
All right. So, from the English Channel, where did you end up going?
We come back and then worked up and down the coast a little bit until April the 9th, 1942, I believe it was. And then we got underway. We noticed it was kind of funny. They're putting some, in the cargo, they're putting some mosquito nets in. But anyway, we got underway and we started heading south. And we were going through the canal into the Pacific.
All
That
right.
was April the 9th, we left New York.
All right. And where did you end up going?
We went through the canal, which was an experience, and then we went to an island called Tangipahoa. And there we unloaded the people. And it was something of interest. When we first went in there and anchored, the boats would come out. That's the people selling fruit and stuff. They would come out to the ship and holler out what they had. And they'd say, "Whoa, $1, 1 quarter, no, 2 shillings, 3 shillings." The first trip in there. And we later on we made another trip in there. It's $1, $5. They got educated in a hurry.
When you made that trip, was it another convoy?
We were in convoy until we got down there, and it was right at the time where that sea battle, the 2 carriers were sunk, and the hospital ship was in Tangipahoa, and they brought a lot of the patients in there while we were there.
And what was
the Hornet and the Wasp that got sunk, I think.
Okay. And so how many ships were in your convoy when you made it down to that island?
Well, we had as many as 26, but I don't think all of them went down there. They went to different places. But anyway, after that, we went back to San Diego. And this time we took on Marines, and then we went back in that area again and to our dislike.
All right. How about how many Marines got on board this time?
Oh, we would have from 75 to about 125.
And
But all their equipment and everything too.
And how was it? How was the interaction between Navy, Coast Guard, and the Marines?
Not as bad as some people make it out. In fact, I got my shoulder hurt. I was wrestling with one of the Marines, and he fell on the hatch, and he kind of threw my shoulder out. But anyway, this time with the Marines, we went on down, and we went past Tangipahoa this time, and we were out in the Pacific. I don't know where, off Guadalcanal, but I don't know exactly where. But they done something they never do anymore, I'm sure. But all at once, all these ships from everywhere begin to come up. And we spent, I guess, about a half an hour or so together. And then they all disappeared. And then our convoy, 26 ships, went on until we went to Guadalcanal.
Okay, so now you're in Guadalcanal. What year is this?
It's the same year, 42. But anyway, we went around, there's an island out that I forget the name of it. It's just a rock, but went around it and started down the coast of Guadalcanal. And when we started there, there's always noise and all going on the ship. There was none of that. You could hear the ship slicing through the water. So beautiful, island, so beautiful and all with it. And our convoys started sliding down the canal channel going towards Henderson Field. And as we went down, we saw a few little old tracers come off the island, and then there were some of the destroyers or escorts shot a few shots. And we went on down to Henderson Field, dropped our hooks, and started unloading.
And at this point, what was the stage of the Battle of Guadalcanal?
Wasn't none. They didn't even fight back right then. But it got hotter later.
All right, so this is just the beginning.
That's right, first day.
All right. And I'm assuming there was a lot of Navy ships around, right?
Well, there was 26 ships in the convoy that made the landing.
All right. And what about air cover?
They had it, but we wasn't too much. At first, we wasn't too much interested in that. We were too busy looking and seeing where we were at and what was going on, and then putting our boats over and start unloading.
All right. And at this point, are you now driving one of those landing?
I'm a young person. I was a bow hook at that time. They give me a Springfield rifle, and I was to be there. I was a protector on my boat.
And protector of what? Of the landing craft?
Well, I guess people what. But anyway, as the day went on, 2 or 3 planes come over, and the worst thing in the world, all these boats from different ships would huddle and get together, which was the worst thing. The early part of the war, they didn't know what they were doing, but they'd come over, and then it went away, and we continued unloading and all. And later on, torpedo planes come. The ships got underway. One got hit and had to be beached. The Elliott, and I guess it's still there. And after that, as things settled down, we unloaded more. And everything went well until after dark.
So tell me more about the unloading process. What are you doing while that's happening during the day?
Well, say they put my boat over, and you get over, and then they drop cargo and people down in your boat. When you get your load, you go to the beach. They could designate, you go to the beach in waves. Maybe the fighting troops will go first, and then cargo comes next, and until you get them to where they can sustain themselves.
And so your job during that is you're holding the rifle?
I'm the what they call a bow hook. That's the number 2 man on the landing boat. I hadn't graduated to a coxswain, full coxswain for the boat yet.
All right. And so how many do you think trips you made that day?
Oh, Lord. You just went back and forth as much as you could. But whenever it got dark is when business began to pick up. That night we had 26 ships laying in off Henderson Field. And all at once to our left, we began to see flashes. And what was happening, the Japanese flotilla come through, and if it had decided to take care of the landing boat, there was 26 of them dead in the water. They didn't do it. They were after the main ships, the ones that was protecting us. And they went around and they sunk 3 American heavy cruisers. And that's what we were seeing the flashes from.
And
Astoria, Vincennes, and Quincy all went down in about 30, 40 minutes.
you had a front row seat to watching that.
Well, we were about 7 miles away. We could see the flash of the gun and everything. And they also shot up a Canberra. That was an Australian heavy cruiser. So there was four heavy cruisers. Now, before that, after that first flight come through in the morning, the Jarvis did get hit. And I remember it coming by, and it was giving us bread and stuff, and I said they were going back to state. But I heard later it never got there. That was an escort ship, a destroyer.
So how long did you end up spending at Guadalcanal?
Well, off and on over a year, but we spent 5 months of it down in Australia getting repaired.
All right. So tell me more about the landings and how, those first initial days. What else did you observe?
Well, it went well there until after all them ships were sunk that night. Then the next day, they decided we would go out and they would take our cargo and stuff down to about 600 miles south of there to a place called Espírito Santo. That's where ships from the States would come out with supplies and put them down there. And later they would carry them on up to Guadalcanal. But anyway, after we went back down to Espírito Santo that night, after all this, the next day when we got through loading, we went, we didn't stay around that area anymore. We went down and we reloaded. And our ship was the first one to come back with supplies. They give us 2 destroyer escorts, and then they would escort us up. And we went up, and across from Henderson Field is a place called, I forget it now, but it was a seaplane base for the Japs. But they done a lot of fighting over there the first day. None over on Guadalcanal, but on this other Tulagi. And there's most of fighting on Tulagi. But we went back into Tulagi with a load of supplies and unloaded them. Nothing happened, and then we go back down again and get another load, and we start up. And this way on our way back up, the destroyer Blue got hit. And they brought some of his people over to us because we had a doctor on our ship. And then we unloaded and went back, and then we made a third trip. And then we went back to Guadalcanal, and the Betelgeuse was in there unloading, and they said everything went well while they unloaded. So we started unloading, and we unloaded, and we took on a lot of empty drums that had been filled with gas, because that was the only way of getting fuel up to the planes. You took it up in drums and they'd put it off on the beach, and then they'd try to keep enough to keep a few planes in the air. But anyway, the third trip up on the way out, about midnight, I was sleeping in the top bunk about 80 feet forward of the number 4 hole. And at midnight, everything, bunks, people, everything was thrown out, scattered everywhere. Everything dark as it ever been. And all you could smell was that old fuel oil. We had been torpedoed. And I was trying, we were supposed to carry our life jackets with us all the time. Well, I couldn't find in that mess down there. But somebody had said that them little mattresses we slept on would float. So here I was in my drawers with my mattress, trying to get out of there. And I got out and went up on deck. I was a pretty looking thing going up for muster. But that's what happened. Oh, we got hit. And we had, I think, 5 or 6 people got killed.
And you were hit while moving or docked?
We were going back for another load.
Okay. So in the middle of the night, you got hit by a submarine torpedo.
Yeah, a torpedo. He put it in there too, in number 5 hole.
All right. So what happened? Did the ship survive?
Oh yes. Well, what they done? After that, they tried to start the engines and all, but the shaft was bent. They couldn't do it. So they hooked we had 2 escorts destroyed, new destroyed. Meredith was one, and I don't know, I can't remember the name of the other one. But anyway, they hooked one of them on us, and he was dragging us along at 3 knots, trying to get us away from there. And they had a sea going tug that come out and took over. And then it could tow us at 7 knots. So we done a little better and took it on down to Espiritu Santos. When we got down to Espiritu Santos, they tried to shore up. Well, we tried to shore up as best we could while it was out there. That means put petition, field places that were kind of soft. But anyway, we got back down there and they done the best they could, and they said they was going to send us. They were going to tow us 2,000 miles to Sydney, Australia. And while we were at Espiritu Santos, one day they told me, they said, take the ship fitters in your boat and go around and let them trim all them flared edges and all extending out in the water, so we'll have less drag whenever we go. So I've done that. And if you look in that phone, you'll see a picture of me, the hole and all.
There's a photo of you doing that work?
No, sir. I just took the ship fitters down there. And later on, when they got through trimming it and all, I took that boat, I had a landing boat, and I went from one side to the other through that hole. If I'd have got hung in there, they'd have hung me.
So how much water did the ship take?
Oh, it just settled down. See, you got 5 cargo spaces, each one separate. So you'd have to knock 2 of them out but one of them had a hole in it. Of course, it was filled with water. But the rest of them managed to hold well enough that we got it patched up, and then they could take it on down to Sydney later on.
And was there a fire on board at that point too?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay.
After they got hit, they went around the casualties and all. One guy got both his legs. All this goes into the overboard, trash and all. Next morning, you could see sharks everywhere in the water. Their old fins going through that trash and all. But one thing about it, the old flag was still waving.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Chester, I understand you've got photos of that hole in the ship. Could you show me?
I don't know. I hope I get the right one. Let my grandson come over.
What about the one that you got right there? Yeah, okay.
What is it? John Macy driving through the hole or what?
Yeah, it's the one with the hole in. And this is and that's the one of him going through.
Which one is you?
I'm standing up driving the boat through.
All right, so you're the gentleman on the left.
Well, I can't see, but I guess.
All right, very good. Very nice. All right, so now your ship is damaged. It needs to get repaired. So what happens next?
Well, we shorted up best we could. Shorted up means to make it as watertight as you can. And then they hooked a seagoing tug on us again that And we started off going to Australia 2,000 miles away at 7 knots an hour.
How long did that take?
Well, we left the first part of September. I think we got down there maybe the 1st of October, somewhere along there. We made one stop on the way down. We stopped at New Caledonia on the way down. That's a French island. And I had, well, not this time, but one time when we was in New Caledonia, I had an experience. See, that they didn't have the laws concerning women in the Navy that we have. And they had a house there that had two in it. And they had I was on shore patrol. And they had a line of them there. And they got to fighting up there, so we closed it down.
When you're
that's something a lot of people don't know.
all right. When you're making that trip for over a month, going 7 knots an hour, what's it like to be on that ship? Are you getting a little stir crazy?
Well, by then you begin to get used to it. As long as you got groceries, you do pretty good. But we did run into a ship one night that wouldn't recognize itself. So you get kind of shook up whenever that happened. We run into one. It was a Dutch ship. We had trouble recognizing, but that was about the worst thing until we got close. It got rough, and we didn't know whether we could be able to make her in or not.
And
But we did.
Do you have an escort at all?
Oh yes. They had an escort for part way. Whenever they get to think out of the area, then you can take over.
So now you make it to Sydney, and how long are you in Sydney for?
5 months. When we first got to Sydney, they had the Chester in there. That is a heavy cruiser that had been torpedoed. So they were working on it. Well, when they got it finished, here comes the Portland in, another heavy cruiser. She had a hole in her, and they had to fix it before they get to us. Well, whenever they got her finished, here comes a shot off of it. And then they said, well, we better take you up into this, I think they call it welding dock. It's the dry dock dug out of the mountain and with a gate on it. Out of the hills, I should say. And that's where they dry docked us, and we spent the rest of our time getting repaired there. But during all that time, well, I forgot to mention, when we first went in there, some of them girls had already learned a semaphore. And the boys on the boat, some of them had dates before they got docked. It was a wonderful place, Sydney.
And what do you end up doing while your ship is getting repaired while you're sitting there in Sydney?
Well, you have your routine work, the stuff, and the watches and stuff like that. And once while we were there, the Japanese probably put a plane off and come over one night, and then we all had to scurry around and get prepared for that.
So you're still living on board while it's being repaired?
That's right. Yes, sir.
All right.
See, it was in the stern is where this happened, so we still had space where we could stay.
So what happens after that? When do you ship out again?
Well, we stayed there 5 months, and then a sad day come when the boys had to leave the girl, and we got underway, and we went to a place called New Caledonia, back up that we come by, to take on. See, we lost people and the others had got transferred off, So we had to reestablish ourselves up at New Caledonia, and they put more guns on. In fact, they sent me over to 20 millimeter school. That's a new kind of a gun they brought out there for us, for that type of ship. And we had to go in training and all for that. And then they would train us and our duties in the ship. Now, the funny thing about when we got back to New Caledonia to take on more people, the third person to come aboard was my brother, and I didn't know he was in the service. And he was in the Navy, and I was in the Coast Guard under the Navy, and we stayed together for 18 months.
Wow, on the same ship.
That's right.
How common was that?
Not very common. And especially one that had been turned down by the Navy.
Yeah. And what did your brother do?
Well, he done the same thing I did. He was running boats. One time he kind of like to got me. We were at Guadalcanal having exercise at night, practice. And we had our lights off. And all at once this boat cut across my bow there. If he'd have hit it and racked up, that would have been something. 2 boys from Loranger killed with a boat accident. That did happen, though.
All right, so you take on your brother along with other folks in New Caledonia, and then where do you go?
We went back to Guadalcanal and we started with supplies. We went to New Zealand, back up and back, different places. But and then after about, I don't know, quite a while, then they got us ready for another landing. This time we only had 9 ships in the convoy. But we went to I'm trying to think of the little old place. At that time they decided to start island hopping, not take every island. But this one,
Is it Bougainville?
Bougainville, that's it. Yeah. And that's where we went to Bougainville. Now I had another experience. See, the Japs tried to give me a bath in the Pacific twice. But anyway, when we got up there and we landed, you had a little island with palms on it. Beautiful little island, about 2 acres, I guess, out. And then you had a curve around back, and they were landing back on towards the tip of that curve. And so when we went in, we had to go in around that island, all the way around, and then unload our stuff. And I looked across the back of it, and our ship was right there. So I said, shucks. But the first thing, whenever they went in, the destroyers and all hit that island so bad, them palms were just flying everywhere. You wouldn't have thought anything had been left there. But anyway, I took my trip in and went around, and I saw the ship over there. I said, shucks, I'm going to cut through here. It was a wide area, though. And I got about halfway through there. And the Marines are supposed to went over there, through the island there, and they got 13 Japs off or something. But anyway, whenever I got about halfway back to the ship, something went zing, and the deckhand, he hit the deck. And then we went a little further, and it come a little closer, zing, engineer hit the deck. And we went a little further, and another one come, and guess where I went? I headed the boat out, and I went with them down But they were after. They were pretty close to them.
So they're shooting at you.
Yeah. I,
What are they shooting at you with?
they were shooting at me.
Well, this is like
In
rifle
the boat.
fire.
Yes, sir. There wasn't nothing else around. It had to be me and my boat.
All right. And at that point, you're driving.
I was steering, but I headed her out, and then I went with them down there and let the boat do its thing. And when I got back to the officer's deck, he said, "Don't go that way, they're shooting." I said, "To hell with it, I know all about it." We'd already had an apple out of that barrel.
Did you ever have to make any landings under heavy fire?
No, sir. No, sir, I was lucky. I always, well, out there, usually you caught them by surprise and you got under there and got the first day or two, it went all right. But you had to watch later on. So if a boat was stuck there to help the people, while you went away, well, they got in trouble. In fact, one Coast Guard got what is it, highest honor because he helped. He was there. I was a signalman, Coast Guard signalman. Marines still think a lot of him. And that happened in Guadalcanal. Now this happened not in Guadalcanal down there. That's close to where Kennedy was at. Later on, I'll tell you something more about Kennedy.
All right. So now, what else are you doing at Bougainville? Anything else you can recall that was memorable?
Well, we took supplies in there, and then after that, well, my time was getting short, and they shipped me back, and that was in spring of 1944. That's whenever I left.
All right. So that was when they shipped you back. You were done for your service during World War II.
I went back to the Coast Guard after that, the real Coast Guard, not Coast Guard with the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
All that time I'm telling you about on the ship was Navy time, but I was still being paid. Now, one thing I forgot, we first went on that Navy ship, they lost our pay records, and for 60 days we got no pay. The captain was going to try to pay out of his pocket, but there's too many of us, and he didn't do it. That's some of the rough stuff that we had during the war.
Okay, so you're stuck without pay for like 60 days. So how do you manage?
Well, when I first went, that was at first there. But most of us had a little money, so the canteen was there. But big thing, we had food and our clothing and all, and we wasn't out anywhere where you could spend very much. But we still didn't have the money.
Yeah. So you spent about a total of 3.5 years during World War II.
With the Navy.
Yeah. All right.
That did not want me.
And you saw what? How many battles did you end up seeing? You saw the one at Guadalcanal from about 7 miles away. Any other ones?
Well, that one went on and off for about 9 or 10 months out there. But our big thing after that was keeping supplies there for the people, because them planes needed fuel and all to try to protect it. That was the big thing. Once you went there, it didn't get hot until later on. Then they come after you. That's whenever the business picked up.
All right. So you saw some interesting things the first few days in Guadalcanal. Then you also got hit by a torpedo. Anything else?
Lot, I can tell you then.
Could you repeat that?
I said, not until the Navy let us loose and let us come back to the Coast Guard. Then we began really living again.
Okay. All right, so take me through that time period. What's going on then? Where do you end up going?
Well, whenever they released me, I was one of the last 12 to leave the ship. 60 Coast Guard went on there, and all of them had dwindled and got off except 12. We were unmarried, and then we were the last ones to leave the ship. And whenever I left, they sent me to New Orleans. And when I got to New Orleans, they asked me, where did I want to go? Said, you've been in the Pacific, we want to give you a choice to play. I said, a six-bidder. Well, I'd heard the older boys say that the six-bidders down at the mouth of the river was good duty. But they said, you don't want that. And they put me on quarters and subsistence. That means you pay and all at a fingerprinting office in the back of the customs house. And I stayed there for a while.
So this is down in New Orleans.
That's right. And it was run by women, and I wasn't used to that.
So what are you doing day to day there?
A fingerprinting.
Okay.
What they were doing, see, they had to keep a record of all the people that worked around the docks and all that during the war and all that stuff. So what you would do whenever people come in to apply for a job, they had to get their Coast Guard card. And they would come and we would fingerprint them and check them out, and then they'd give them the card that they needed to get to work.
And how long did you end up doing that for?
I guess probably about a year and a half. And then just before it finished, they took me out of there and they put me out on the waterfront with a Jeep, checking what they call dangerous cargo. So you have to check all the cargo going overseas and all, make sure it's placed in the right place and all. And I had that for about another year, I guess.
And how long were you in the Coast Guard overall? At what point did you stop?
Well, I was in the Coast Guard 26 years and 4 months.
All right. So you make it to
That's
19...
including the time up with the Navy.
So that takes you to what, 1967?
That's right. I got out in November the 1st, 1967.
And what are some other memorable things you did in the Coast Guard until you retired from there in 1967?
Well, for a while I've spent, let's see, at one time, I was trying to figure, I spent some time at the Coast Guard in Portsmouth at the Coast Guard base. And while I was there, I made warrant officer. And when I made warrant officer, they sent me to New York in charge of a buoy tender, a 130-foot buoy tender. And I spent time there. And later, I went back to, I was transferred back to Norfolk. And I was on the seagoing tug in charge of it. And and they decided that they needed it, and so they brought the old Hudson. It was a Coast Guard cutter. It was old whenever I used to see it at Canal Street whenever I first got in service. But here they come wanting me to go on it. And they took mine and sent it up north. And then I had to clean that thing up and stay on it. But I had a spell that I was a chart assigned Portsmouth base, and it was real interesting. I was assigned a 52-foot buoy boat, and the commander there was Commander Shinger. And if he got a job that nobody could handle, he had a way of funneling it over to me. But anyway, one time a buoy got loose out in the harbor, and it drifted ashore, and it's worked its way into the sand halfway up the buoy. Now they got a long shaft down below there. Now all this was in the sand, and nobody could get it. And he says, "Can you go get that buoy?" I said, "I don't know, sir, I'll go." But I went out and I found out that there was a piling not too far from there. So I put a line on the piling back to the boat where I could hold it. And then I put a line from the boat to the buoy. And I started digging that sand out with that screw, the boat doing it. And you know, I dug, and all at once that thing popped up out of the water. Well, when it did, I let them know I had it up, and then the tender come got it. And now another job he gave me, he found out that I had spent time on lighthouses. Well, we had a storm to come through and peel part of the roof on the Cape Hatteras light off. And it was out of really copper. But he wanted somebody to go down and go up and get the measurements of that stuff. And them people down there said it couldn't be done. So he called me in the office and he says, "I want you to take that boy." I said, "Have you been on lighthouse?" I said, "Yes, sir, I served on lighthouse." So he said, "You take that boy, that man, and you go down there and you get the measurements so we can redo that." Well, I went down there and I see why they didn't get it. They was trying to go up the outside, and all those old fittings had been there close to 100 years, and they was all wasted and rotten. Well, you 190 feet in the air, you don't want to fall off by no means. So I didn't know. That afternoon, we went back down in our bunks. And at night, the boy that I'm supposed to get up there to do the measurements, he was still wallering and rolling. But the next morning, we went up there and I looked it over. And I went inside and I saw the ceiling was tin, had screws in it. So I pulled some of them off, got him up there and went back. And I took it back to him and I told him how I thought that they should fix them things so they could put them up the inside and you don't have to get up and get around, you know. But anyway, the little fellow that over at the machine shop over there where they fabricated, he done it and he got some big award.
Before we forget, you mentioned something about Kennedy.
Oh yeah. I was on my tug and this was 1960. I was on my tug in the harbor, and the captain of the port had called me and he said, "I want you to go get some charts, and I want you to meet the Eagle." That was a training ship for the cadets. Meet them and escort them up to Washington. Well, I did. And whenever we got up there, we docked at some kind of Navy landing that's or something up there. But it's not in the best part of Washington. And they had open house. Open house, you let anybody come on and look around, but you got to protect your ship. But anyway, at lunchtime, this fella come on and said, "President Kennedy is over on the Eagle, and he would like for you to come over and have lunch with him." I said, "Well, I might have to walk back to Norfolk if I do, and I better stay over here." I didn't go. I wished I had went, because we both had operated some around Guadalcanal, and we'd have had something to talk about.
And when you were in charge of the cutter, are you actually navigating it, or what are you doing?
I either handle it or tell the boys how to handle it. I'm watching all the time, though. I don't want to get aground.
Mm-hmm.
I messed up. One time I did make a mistake. Well, twice. One time a line got in the screw and I had to have it took out. It was dumb. Another time they told me to go out. There was a tug coming down sinking. It was towing some stuff down the river, and I went out there, and sure enough, it had a hole in it, and we was trying to get pumps down there and get it all pumped out, and it had a part of the tow line coiled up on the stern. Well, this seaman had only been on the boat with me about 2 months. Come to me and he said, "Captain, we better get that line and move it." I said, "Boy, can't you see I'm busy?" I didn't want them boys to get caught down there and trying to pump that thing out. And I didn't do it. That's the thing I should have done. That lets you know. Better listen to what other people say.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to write a letter and explain to the admiral and explain all that.
Hmm. What was your highest rank while in the Coast Guard?
I ended up Chief Boatswain W-3. You can go to 4, but I was a 3. I had 2 more years to go before I qualified for 4.
All right. And why did you leave the Coast Guard?
I had a job waiting for me. Well, it was my children were in school, and I had back in New Orleans close to home, and I said, well, I guess maybe it's time to go. For a while, I kind of wished I had stayed the other couple of years, but I'm glad now that it worked out the way it did.
What was the job that you had waiting for you?
That was assistant Coast Guard, well, inspector, tug inspector. I had experience with the Coast Guard, and they were changing some of the barge laws and things in, and it worked out pretty well.
All right. And what would you say your most memorable moment was in the Coast Guard?
That's hard. I had a lot of good ones. Yeah. Oh, this was one. That fella that always had me going on these jobs that nobody else wanted. One day, whenever I first went to the Portsmouth base there, they gave me the job of mustering the people in the morning. A lot of them were being transferred. And I would have to get them, muster them, check them out and all. And then they would tell me, this person wants so many here, he wants so many here. And then what you got through, you take and clean up the yard with. Well, down where we mustered every morning, them people with their cigarettes, they would be everywhere. So I would go, and when I get through, everybody wanting people, I didn't have none left. So I was in my uniform, and I said, I'll break this up. So one morning I was in my uniform, and here comes Commander Shingler through. I got a broom, I'm cleaning her up. He says, send the chief in my office. I went in there and he started on me. I said, Commander, when I get through divvying up, nobody left but me. That place has got to be clean. And he's always asked me about working instead of having somebody else do it. But if I couldn't do it, I didn't want to tell you to do it. But anyway, I was, later years, he had transferred, was on the Eastern Shore inspection team. And I was over at the base, tied up on my tug. And we had painted the tug, but the visor, the little piece in front, nobody could get on the stage and paint. Stupid me. I said, well, you get me a boatswain's chair, get me the paint and the brush, I'll show you how to do it. So here I was, boy, I was putting on, here comes Shingler down the dock. He said, you'll never learn, you'll never learn.
The whole idea is you're supposed to find somebody to do it for you.
Well, but they didn't know, but they didn't want to know. But I always figured if I couldn't do it, I'm not going to tell you to do it.
What was your proudest moment while in the military?
Proudest? I don't know if I had so many good ones. I guess that some of the best I had, it wasn't like being in the service. When I was over to the lighthouse, see, when I went over there, I was on 83 footer, and I asked to go over to the lighthouse. And everybody said, oh, it's the end of the world, you won't like that. And they had an old boy over there that was hard on them boys. But anyway, he was getting out of the service, and he chewed tobacco. And I went over and I remember now, you come to the end of the world, you'll never get it. And it was just like throwing a rabbit in a briar patch. We took care of our job, fished and hunted and had a wonderful time. It was some of the best service I ever had over at the lighthouse. And the island was covered with hogs. We'd catch hogs and all kinds of stuff. And still got our work done.
Where was the lighthouse located?
At Southport, North Carolina.
And
I tell you, that you're talking about a special event. Well, we had a fellow by the name of Steele, Commander Steele, come down to inspect us there. And he asked me, he said, how do you like it over here? And I said, Commander, I love it, but next year I'll have a daughter 6 years old to be going to school, and I don't know about that. He said, let me see what I can do for you. I dreamed it was just like so many times, you know, they tell you this and they don't know, you know. Sure enough, he got back up there. He gave me orders to go on the other side with my daughter. So I guess that's one of the most memorable.
Nice. And where were you when World War II ended? You were stateside?
Yes, sir, I was stateside. I guess I was still in the customs. Yeah, I was in the customs house. I remember. Yeah.
And do you remember that day? Was there a big celebration?
Yeah, I sure do. In New Orleans, man, the streets were covered with people, everything. No, my wife was pregnant, and she wanted to see what was going on. And I got her on the street corner, we drove her around so she could see. But it's hard to believe. Hard to believe.
And I imagine you must have felt happy and also proud that the war was over too.
You glad, you know, because all the restrictions and stuff. But it was a wonderful time. But now, the first one there, that was when the Japanese, the first one, there wasn't too much to it. That's when the German. But people were sure glad. People that you wouldn't have thought been out in the streets enough.
And what did you do after your military service?
Well, Worked with that tugboat company 17 years. And then I retired to the farm. I raised cattle for about 20 years. Got to where I couldn't get around, see what I was doing, putting the fences up and keeping them in. So the last, I guess, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it is, I've just been cooling. And that don't mean I didn't have gardens. I always had gardens and stuff like that. Yeah. Now, really, I don't know how many acres it is, but all of this around where I'm at, I cleared it up, a lot of it by hand.
So you had a pretty big farm.
Well, I'll tell the story of that. Whenever I was up in Alaska for a while, and my wife and I managed to save $4,000. I was a poor person. I didn't know what it was, how to save. But anyway, I come home. My mother had asked my brother to give her $3,500 to remodel the old home down there. And he told her it wasn't worth it. So when I come, I would give mother the money, but she said, if you give me $3,500, I'll give you 35 acres of land and first option on the old house. Well, I give her the money, and she did, and that's where I started here. Now this property here was in 1886. My great-great-grandfather, they say, traded a yoke of oxen for about 300 acres here. And this is part of it. So out of the 35, I added until I had 110 acres whenever I got to where I couldn't do anything more.
Nice. Is there anything you would like to add that I did not ask you today?
I can tell you a little bit about my experiences over in Texas early.
Sure.
Whenever we left, mother and dad, my dad went back to Texas to work for a while. And when he went back, mother ended up having twin boys. And she was busy with the twins in a logging camp and didn't have a lot of help. But I had learned that if I followed them old men around, they'd give me nickel and dimes, and I knew where the commissary was. And I would go to the commissary and eat candy, go home, wouldn't eat nothing. Well, this went on. They were new with raising kids. They didn't know. They were old enough, but they never had to show. But anyway, whenever I got to be about, I guess about 4.5, 5, I got sick. And they took me 17 miles to Cleveland, Texas. And the old doctor there said he's got pellagra, which is a relatively new disease. But he says, and we're going to treat him with arsenic. And they would give me 1 drop of arsenic. But this mother told me that. 1 drop one day, 2 the next. Get up to about 9 and my eyes would swell and they'd back off. And then do it again. Well, I wasn't getting well, and my dad was having health problems. So my mother wanted to go back to where we were. But one other thing before I leave Texas. One time, I'd follow the old men around, as I said, and give me money. But one time I cut through a pasture. I was about 4 years old. A gander got me.
A what?
A goose.
Okay.
He grabbed me with his bill and he hit me with his wings, and I was having a fit. And the neighbors had to come get the gooses off of me.
All right.
And then whenever they come back from over to Texas, they brought me down. They had a new doctor in Hammond with the name of Newman, and they took me to see him, and they said, see what he could do. He said, "Oh, it ain't nothing but vitamin deficiency." It took my candy away, and I got well. Later on, I was 7 years old in school, and Dad was plowing fresh ground, and I was wallowing and playing around on it, and I got pneumonia, and they took me to Hammond and called the doctor, and you know how he treated me? He said, "Wrap him in a mustard poultice and push him out there until the crisis passed." Must have passed. I'm still here.
And you are what, 101 today?
I'm 101. 29th, I'll be 102
The 29th of...
this month.
Oh, wow. Coming right up.
Yes, sir.
All right. How's this for our final question? Is there anything you would like to tell future generations? Any type of wisdom or words of advice?
Yes, sir, there is, but they're not going to listen. But I went through the Depression. I was old enough to watch my mother and dad, and it was hard times. In fact, when the mother made shirts for us to wear to school out of fertilized sacks, and I was one of the first, I guess, to have them big numbers on the back of your shirt. But anyway, we had 10-3-3 and 4-12-4. But you may think it's difficult and hard, but you don't know nothing until you've been through a depression like our people had to go through. I was only a child. I was 12 years old enough to know, but it was hard. But you can make it if you have the gumption. Mother, the way they done through the Depression, Mother would make butter and eggs, and she would put them in a lard can about so high. And we would walk 4 miles with that. We had to go early in the morning or the butter would melt. But that was to help out with what my dad was doing. My dad was trying to raise strawberries. He could raise plenty, but you had to ship them to Chicago and get returns before you knew what they sold for. And one time through the Depression, he picked, well, you work all year in the field, growing the plants, getting the straw, and you don't do all this anymore. And then all that work, and 25 cents you paid for the crate. And ship them to Chicago and get returns for $24. You was going in the hole.
Wow.
That did happen. But you got to have guts, determination, stick with it. See, the only thing that, whenever I went into service, about the only thing you could do around here was chop cotton for 75 cents a day, and then cut, split stove wood for people to burn. And then you could burn charcoal. And that was about the bigger thing. And you had milk for people. But it was a rough time. And just think, Uncle Sam been paying me for nothing for 50-some years. I did find a better way to do.
Yes, you did. Well, Charles, I want to thank you so much for spending the time with me and sharing your stories. I want to thank you for everything that you've done for our country and for your service.
Well, I thank you for having me. This is about, I guess, used to at reunion. Well, for years, I wouldn't talk about it because who's going to believe that stuff? But then I would go to the reunions and we would hash it all over and over and over. And then I didn't even tell my family. My daughter went to the reunion and began to find out. But in later years, since I found out they got it on that thing, I don't mind talking about it.
Well, I'm glad that you did.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. I thank you.